Welcome to a new Team CGC 9.8 video, and today I wanted to expand on a video I did a couple weeks ago about comic book investing, and I really wanted to expand on that, talking about comic book investing in 2019 because I think movies and shows and pop culture events can really affect certain issues. So I wanted to get into that in a little bit more detail because in the last video I sort of did on collecting and investing. I went into that in quite detail, but I didn't really talk about too much about investing in 2019 with social media, pop culture events, cons, movies, and how they can affect certain issues. Because being about, I would say, 2 to 3 years now of really seriously collecting comic books, mostly in the CGC 9.8s. We'll talk a little bit about that too. But seriously investing in these books, I've noticed some of the short-term volatility that can happen because of a movie or a pop culture event or whatever it might be. So I think you really got to be prepared and knowledgeable about that and make sure you're not overpaying for certain issues. So we'll get into that a little bit later. Right now I did want to go over just some of the basics of comic book investing. And I mean, the overarching rule of comic book investing is to buy what you love. And that's the overall rule, the number one rule. And comic books are supposed to be fun, right? So there's absolutely no reason in the world why you should buy something that you don't really like, or maybe it makes you feel a little bit cringy, or maybe 10 people are telling you to buy it but you still don't like it, then don't buy it. So in this business you want to have fun, so you really want to just buy what you love. And even in life, you want to do what you love. You shouldn't, even in life, you shouldn't be day in and day out doing things that make your stomach turn, or things that you don't like or make you feel negative in any way. And comic books are definitely like that. You want to buy what you love, buy those characters you were really nostalgic from when you were a kid, or maybe you just got into comic collecting in the last couple of years and you're really into some of the new variants and stuff, then do that, because if you're really loving that, then do that. So first rule in comic book investing is to buy what you love. Don't listen to other people, don't listen to a hot movie that just came out that says that's the hottest superhero right now. Forget about all that and just listen to yourself, listen to your heart, and buy whatever you really love or whatever is catching your eye or whatever interests you. And for me personally, that's generally like 1980s, 1990s Batman, Spider-Man comics. Pretty standard, I would say, for the kind of things that I love. Star Wars too, for sure. X-Men, Incredible Hulk, Avengers. Just pretty basic for my collecting style. I know a lot of people get into a lot of indie stuff and things like that, and that's cool too. But yeah, definitely overall arching rule, if you are getting into comic book investing right now, is to buy what you love. Now, I like to separate, getting into a bit more of the details, I like to separate sort of pre-1980s comics and then after 1980s comics into two separate sort of bins. Because I think you should go about investing in those types of comics in two different ways. So before 1980s, obviously, early Bronze Age, Silver Age, Golden Age, I think personally that is probably the best way to invest in comics, is buying iconic first appearances, origins, and iconic covers and everything like that, iconic team-ups and key issues pre-1980s. Especially in that Silver Age, you get so many awesome first appearances. First Black Panther, first Galactus, first Silver Surfer, so many, first Falcon in that Fantastic Four run, first Thanos and Iron Man, then Amazing Spider-Man, so many cool villains in the first 100 issues that had first appearances. So to me, that's probably the most legitimate way to invest in comic books, is just buying those iconic first appearances of 1960s, 1970s comics, and just, buying the best conditioned issues for your budget, basically. That, I think, is probably the most legitimate way to invest in comics, because before 1980s, they weren't printed as much, so they're a little bit more rare. And with the whole movie industry just blowing up and so many superhero movies just coming out one after the other, these superheroes are basically going to be ingrained in our pop culture, within our culture, not even pop culture, just ingrained within our culture. And I think those first appearances from the 60s, a lot of those iconic first appearances, whether it's, Iron Man or the ones I just mentioned, any of the Avengers, so many you could choose from. I think that's a really good way to invest in comics, and you're going to do well over time, and have all those iconic first appearances is awesome. So definitely that is sort of one way I would go about investing in comics if I was buying comics before 1980, or before 1975, 1980. After 1980, comics were really printed quite a bit. So personally, I'd recommend, if you're investing in comics after 1980 and you are thinking about it from an investment perspective, you pretty much after 1980 just want to go with CGC 9.8 comics. And that's basically the highest grade you can expect to buy. There are 9.9s and 10s, but they're just generally out of most people's budgets. So the 9.8 is sort of the highest grade copy that you can expect to get. And again, in 1980s and 90s, these issues, the comic book industry just blew up. So there was a lot of these issues being printed, pretty much as many issues printed as possible that they could sell, because they were selling so much at this time. So that's why I recommend to go the 9.8 route, because then you're still going to have a sort of limited number collection item, whereas if you don't go the 9.8 group, your comic's going to be like one of 10, 20, 30,000, whatever it might be. Whereas in the 9.8, you can look on the CGC census, which I do often here, and a lot of these 80s to 90s comics are usually, there's about 500 to 1,000 9.8s depending on the issue. Sometimes less, sometimes 200 to 300 if it's not really like an actual key, maybe like a secondary key. So to buy a lot of those issues in a 9.8 and get like a 1 of 200 or 1 of 300 item is, I think, really cool. And over time, I think that's really going to show its value, with 9.8s sort of advancing in price more, I would say, than 9.6s or 9.4s or 9.2s. And that's that's a bit of a personal opinion of mine, but it's just, I think, as an thinking about it, comic collecting from an investment perspective, generally collecting versus investing. To me, a collector, you're sort of assembling a lot of issues, and maybe you have a lot of long boxes, so you're not really buying just key issues or origins. You're buying a lot of new comics, a lot of old comics, just anything that you see that really catches your eye and interest. You're willing to kind of have a lot of issues and assemble a lot of issues. You're collecting a lot of issues. And a lot of times that sort of happens sort of as you're making money. So, you get paid this week, then you can go to the comic store to buy like $100 worth of comics or whatever that might be. Investing, though, I think is a little bit different, where, I think you recognize an opportunity that these superheroes will probably be ingrained within our culture for the next 100 years. So as an investor, you're likely removing some cash from your stock portfolio or your real estate portfolio. In general, I would say at least $10,000, probably $20,000 to $30,000. A lot of these serious comic book investors, that's what they do. So you sort of, if that's what you're doing, if you have $10,000 or $20,000 earmarked for comic books, if personally, if you're buying after the 80s and you have $10,000 or $20,000 earmarked for comic books, buy CGC 9.8s only. If you have $10,000 or $20,000 earmarked for pre-1980s, buy the best conditioned first appearances and origin issues that you can find. And I think those are the two best ways, essentially, to go about investing in comics. And yeah, investing in comics, you're bringing another level to the game, I would say. Whereas collecting, you're just, oh, I really like that issue, or you're buying a lot of new comics too. So you're probably a lot more interested in reading the stories and following along with the new stories, whatever it might be. Whereas as an investor, you're pretty much just thinking about, these superheroes are going to be iconic in our culture, so what issues can I buy from the past that will hold their value and maybe even go up in value, that are like iconic first appearances and this and that. So a little bit different being an investor and a collector. I think, being an investor, you have to be a little more picky. You have to say no more. So, you say no to a lot of the new issues, personally, for me. And that's cool if you're just into it for the stories, as I say. That's a totally different thing. You can get the Marvel apps or the DC apps and read them online. That's cool. But as an investor, yeah, you're really trying to kind of identify those first appearances and origins and classic covers from the past, and investing in them and then holding them. In my opinion, I think you need to hold for at least 10 years for almost any investment to actually work out. At least 5 years, more preferably 10 to 20, even more. That's my time horizon personally. Okay, so yeah, difference between collecting and investing. Obviously, I think investing, like I said, you're bringing another level to the game. You're picking and choosing a little more, and you're probably spending a lot more at once on a lot of these older issues. Again, after 1980s, stick with the CGC 9.8s, I recommend. Before 1980s, buy all those great first appearances. You almost can't go wrong in the best condition that matches your budget. So, as it pertains to the title of this video, the advice you need in 2019, investing in comics. So, in this modern age, movies and pop culture events and TV shows are becoming a lot more important as far as the price of the comics go. So, when you're investing in certain comics, one of the things you do want to do to make sure you're not paying an inflated price in sort of the modern age is make sure the comic book you're buying is not being inflated by some pop culture event or movie. So a good example of this, and I brought out Amazing Spider-Man 361, First Carnage. Last year when that Venom movie came out, Carnage had a cameo at the end. And this Carnage issue in the direct edition, this generally goes for, I would say, about $350. That would be a non-movie price, I would say, in a non-movie environment. $350-ish, maybe even getting to $400 if it just perfectly centered kind of thing. But last year, certainly during that movie and when it first came out, and the word got around that there was a Carnage cameo at the end of that Venom movie. This issue basically shot up to about $450-ish, $500, even in the newsstand version of this issue, we're hitting $500 and a little bit over there. So essentially this issue was about $100 more than it was, let's say, in the previous year, before a Venom movie wasn't even sure that it was going to come out and nobody knew that Carnage was going to be in it, kind of deal. So when you are purchasing any comic, you want to just do a little research and make sure there's no pop culture events, no movies coming out where maybe the character is, this Carnage comic, Carnage was a cameo in the movie, it wasn't an actual Carnage movie. And that, a lot of times that can kind of surprise the market a little bit. And then you get a really, pretty big short-term pop in the issue if people are surprised. And that's kind of the reason why I think, for Spider-Man and Batman movies, some of the level, the higher prices in those issues aren't as pronounced for Spider-Man and Batman, because Spider-Man and Batman are already so iconic. There's nothing new to learn. A lot of times in these Spider-Man movies or Batman movies, there might be a surprise appearance by a villain, and then, the issues of that villain then spike up in price in the short term. But, for Spider-Man and Batman, you're not really going to see too much of a increase in price in all the Spider-Man and Batman issues. But, for something like, say, Deadpool 5 years ago, Deadpool before the movie came out, Deadpool was kind of a cult following, but not a real, certainly not a very iconic superhero. And then that movie came out and just everyone loved it, and Deadpool was the coolest thing, and everyone just, got on buying New Mutants 98, obviously, the first Deadpool. That issue shot up in price, so that really caught the market off guard. Because Deadpool, kind of being like a niche superhero, not a super iconic one like Batman or Spider-Man, caught everyone off guard. The issues skyrocketed, and that's sort of the situations that you do want to look out for. So last year, Venom and Carnage issues definitely were at a premium for most of the year, basically after that trailer came out. Venom and Carnage issues, I would say, probably went for about 10 or 20% more than they are going for currently. So, you know, in 2019, in this modern age, in this age of social media where the word gets out so fast on some of these first appearances, or on some of these appearances in TV shows and movies, you really got to be cognizant of how that's going to affect the price that you're paying for certain issues. And again, it's more pronounced when the comic book market is a bit surprised by an appearance. But yeah, you really want to be careful because, you know, buying an issue like this for normally it would be $350. To pay $450 for this, when, you know, a fair price would be $350, that's going to take out a lot of the rise in price over time, because you know, generally if you can get a decent price for an issue like this, say $350, in 5 to 10 years, I'd say you could probably be pretty confident in saying that it'll be worth $450 to $500 in 10 years, say. But if you purchased it at $450 and you overpaid, you're waiting 10 years just for, you know, a couple extra bucks or just to even break even. So that's not the best feeling in the world, to have to wait all that time because you got a bad price. So in 2019, certainly keep in mind those basics. You do still want to invest in things that you love, things that you're attracted to and interested in. If you are investing in 1980s comics or before, or more modern, 1980s to more modern, I recommend CGC 9.8s. Before 1980s, you know, buy those, or, you know, 1975, 1980. Sometimes you can get good CGC 9.8s in the 70s, the later 70s, for a decent price. But once the 9.8s get super expensive, or just, you know, out of most people's budget, just buy those raw comics at the best grade you can find. That, I think, is a really good way to invest in comic books. And as I said, 80s to modern, stick to the CGC 9.8s if you can. 9.6s too, possibly. You know, you can go with a 9.6 if it's really, if your budget is kind of constrained by some of the 9.8s. 9.6, I think, is you could still do that. 9.4s, 9.2s, I personally wouldn't buy those outright. Certainly if you send some books to CGC, you get a couple 9.4s back or whatever it might be. There's no problem in that. But yeah, besides some of those basics, you know, buy what you love and what we just talked about. You got to watch out for these pop culture events and movies. Talking about the time frame really quickly, because I think a lot of these spikes with this Carnage issue, that's why I brought it out, spiked up last year with the Venom movie. Right now, I feel like it's basically come down to a normal price. So these price movements are quite short term. A very short term, I would say. So what you want to do is you got to be patient. A lot of times, you know, when you're getting into this comic book game, you know, right away, maybe you make a list of like 30 issues that you want. And, you know, it's really easy to just go on the internet and you start seeing all these issues, and if you're not aware of price, it's really easy to overpay for some of them. But a lot of these jumps in prices from movies or pop culture events or whatever it might be are very short-term in nature, and I think they're even becoming more short-term in nature. Whereas, you know, when, you know, the first Iron Man movie came out and things like that, I think obviously Iron Man comics blew up. The first appearance of Iron Man, that Tales of Suspense, blew up, and because it was new, because you know, that it was new. These superhero movies were new. You know, at that time, I think Disney had just bought Marvel, so, you know, at that time, if you were really smart, you could think, oh, well, you know, Disney's just going to put out every superhero movie, you know, every 2 months probably for the next 20 years, and that's kind of what has happened. so it would have been smart to just buy all these books back then. But being in 2019, where the market has evolved quite a lot, from certainly the sort of comic book recession that I say ended in about 2003. You know, once the superhero movies started coming hard and fast, then the market really took off. And pretty much I'd say up until now, there's been a kind of a steady sort of secular uptrend in the comic book market, comic book collecting market. Even though as new issues, the printing has gone down. So, you know, new books in print have gone down, which is to be expected. Every print media is going down because, you know, kids are just reading these comic books on apps now. So that's to be expected. But as far as the collecting market, I think it's been on a nice trend pretty much since these superhero movies started coming fast and hard. So, you know, any issue that you would really want to buy, first of all, follow those basic rules. And then after that, just check the landscape for any pop culture events or movies that could be inflating the price. If there is, be patient, wait. Usually it's literally 3, 4, 5 months. And I bet you if you're patient, you're going to see the issue that you want pop up once the hype calms down. You're going to see that issue that you want pop up for like $100 less. And that's been my experience in the last, you know, year or two, being a huge Venom fan, huge Carnage fan, huge fan of symbiotes and all the first appearances that came out. I've noticed that last year Venom and Carnage issues were 10 to 20% more than they are now. Every now and then you see, you know, a Venom issue or a Carnage issue pop up and, oh, that's pretty cheap compared to last year. And it's really because the cycles are almost so predictable now, and they're very short term, so you can actually know what's going on. It's not anything that's like too hard to figure out. You know, as soon as the sort of rumors in the trailer comes out, the issues are going to get hot until the movie comes out, and then maybe 2-3 months after the movie's released in theaters and it's not in theaters anymore, pretty much the issues come back to a normal price. It does happen quite fast. So I think it's really important to be patient. Really important to be patient in, you know, 2019 investing in comic books. You follow those basic rules though. You know, you buy what you love. You know, in early 1980s and modern comics, buy 9.8s. Before that, buy those iconic first appearances in the best condition you can buy. If you do that and you keep in mind those movies coming out and how they can affect the prices of the issues that you're paying, I mean, you almost can't lose at that point. If you buy what you love and you don't buy anything that's inflated by a movie or a pop culture event, then you're gonna do awesome. So that is kind of my rundown of investing in comic books, and this is similar to a video I did a couple weeks ago, but I really wanted to hit hard on, you know, thinking about movies and some of these pop culture events that do affect the prices of the issues, because they do. And it's really short term, so if you're patient, you can just wait it out and then get a better price. And that's kind of the lesson I wanted to get across in this video. So thanks so much for watching, and yeah, I was kind of almost basically watching that last video that I made and thinking of some things I could add to the video. And I think a video like this is really good to do, I think, you know, once or twice a month, because you know, the basic fundamentals of investing in comic books, I think, are always worth going over. And, you know, buy what you love, and again, you know, keeping in those two ways, I say. If you're really into comics sort of in the Silver Age and Golden Age, you know, buy those iconic first appearances and origins of all those great characters. If you're into comics like in the 80s and 90s like I am, stick with those CGC 9.8s because they were so many printed back then that, you know, as an investor, you do want to have those super near mint copies that are like a 1 of 300 or a 1 of 600 or a 1 of 900 copy, because there were just so many printed. So once you start buying like issues that are in less shape, it just gets into like 1 of 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, which is just doesn't really become very rare or investable anymore. Okay, that's going to be it. I'm going to stop blabbering on now. If you haven't already, please join the team and subscribe to the channel here. And yeah, we got about 5 videos a week we're going at now, and you know, just since the channel is only about a month and a week old, or 2 weeks old maybe now, not even, so every subscriber helps at this early time, so please subscribe to the channel if you could, be so much appreciated. But thanks for watching the video today, and I will see you on the next one.